Imagine a world where your morning coffee, the smartphone currently glued to your hand, and the news flashing on your screen all come from completely different corners of the globe.
Right.
It feels normal now. It feels almost, you know, inevitable, like gravity. But for the Indian economy, getting to this point where we can actually buy that coffee or build that phone easily, it was a massive turbulent journey. It wasn't a straight line at all. Today, we aren't just reading history. We're decoding the survival manual for a modern economy.
It is absolutely a survival manual. I mean, we are looking at the fundamental shift from looking inward, basically trying to do it all alone, to
Mm.
looking outward and realizing that, well, we need the world to survive.
Exactly. And this is a pivotal topic for anyone trying to understand where India stands today.
Yeah.
But before we jump into the deep end, we have a little bit of mandatory housekeeping to take care of for you guys listening. First off, if you are finding value in these deep dives, please explicitly and humbly, we ask you to subscribe to the Simplified UPSC by PPP YouTube channel.
Yeah, it really helps the community grow and, it signals to us that we're on the right track with this stuff.
And if you are capable and enjoy the content, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Your support allows the team to keep bringing super useful, high-density content like this to your ears without cutting any corners.
Absolutely. And a massive, warm shout out to all our current supporters who help create this content. We literally couldn't do it without you.
Also, guys, remind yourself to like the video and share your valuable comments. We actually love reading what you think. It shapes how we structure these discussions.
Just a quick note on resources before we start the actual discussion. Free notes with practice previous year questions, or PYQs, are available right now on the public Telegram channel.
And for the serious learners out there, the ones who want to really master this, not just listen casually, if you want to access all videos of this series at once, along with organized premium notes, and we're talking detailed breakdowns, extra PYQs, and model mains answers, you can join the private Telegram library. Just DM on the public Telegram channel to join.
Okay, I think housekeeping is done. Let's dive in.
Right. Today, we are focusing on a very specific high-stakes topic. We are covering Indian Economy by Sanjeev Verma, specifically Chapter 19, which is titled Looking Outward Towards Globalization. But we aren't just stopping there.
No, we really can't. To ensure we have total conceptual clarity for you, we are going to weave in key concepts from Vivek Singh's Indian Economy. Think of it this way. Verma gives us the narrative, the philosophy, and the argument. Vivek Singh gives us the technical backbone.
The nuts and bolts.
Exactly, the nuts and bolts of things like the balance of payments. You really need both to write a solid answer in the mains.
So what is our mission today? I mean, what are we trying to unpack?
Well, our mission is to understand why a country must look outward. We need to break down the actual mechanics of trade, how it works mathematically, understand the flip side or the risks involved, and finally look at the three megatrends that are shaping the new globalization report.
I love it. Let's start with that core concept, looking outward. It sounds like a motivational poster. Look outward, dream big. But in economics, it means something very specific, doesn't it?
It does. It's a distinct policy stance. In the initial years of development, post-1947, most developing economies, including India, were inward-looking. The technical term for this is import substitution.
Import substitution. So replacing imports with domestic products.
Precisely. The focus was entirely on domestic demand, the domestic population, and domestic resources. The ultimate goal was self-reliance, trying to produce literally everything you need within your own borders.
Right. The idea that, we could do it all ourselves. If we need a pin, we make a pin. If we need an airplane, we figure out how to make an airplane.
Yes, and intuitively that feels safe, right? It feels patriotic. You aren't relying on anyone else. But Sanjeev Verma points out that as an economy grows, this inward focus becomes a massive trap. Because you face severe inefficiencies, huge costs, and technological backwardness, looking outward means engaging with the rest of the world, or ROW. It means recognizing that trade isn't just about buying fancy luxury goods from abroad, it's about fundamental survival.
Why survival, though? That feels a bit dramatic. I mean, India is a huge country with tons of resources.
It sounds dramatic, but it's true because trade involves receipts and payments in foreign currency. An inward economy focuses just on its home currency, the rupee for us. But if you want to develop, if you want to industrialize, you need to import things you literally cannot make or find at home.
Like what?
Like sophisticated machinery for new factories or critical raw materials like crude petroleum to actually run those factories and transport goods. You can't usually pay for Saudi oil with Indian rupees. They don't want rupees. You need hard foreign currency, typically US dollars.
So you look outward, not just because you want to sell things to get rich, but because you absolutely need to buy things just to function.
Precisely. You export to pay for your imports. That is the fundamental, non-negotiable equation of global economics. If you don't export, you don't earn dollars. If you don't earn dollars, you can't buy energy or technology, and then the economy just stops.
And this brings us to a concept that it sounds a bit academic, but it's actually the secret sauce of global trade, the theory of relative resource endowment.
Yes, this is crucial for you to understand. Let's unpack this slowly. The core idea is that no single country has the best of everything. Nature just isn't fair in that way. Every country has a relative deficit in something, whether that's natural resources, knowledge, technology, or domestic markets.
So nobody is perfect. The U.S. has cutting-edge tech. Saudi Arabia has massive oil reserves. China has unparalleled manufacturing capacity.
Right. And Sanjeev Verma uses a very classic comparison to explain this concept: labor versus capital. He uses the example of India versus Germany. This is the textbook case study you should keep in mind.
Okay, India versus Germany. How does that matchup work?
Well, India has an incredibly abundant labor pool. We have a lot of people, and crucially, a lot of young people entering the workforce. So logically, labor is relatively cheap here. If you need 1,000 people to manually stitch shirts or assemble basic electronics, you can find them in India easily and at a cost that makes absolute business sense.
In Germany.
Yeah.
They're on the opposite end of that spectrum, right?
Exactly. Germany has abundant capital. Now, when economists say capital, they mean money, yes, but they also mean advanced machinery, established infrastructure, and deep technological know-how. Those things are relatively cheaper and easier to access there because they have been building them up for over a century.
But their labor.
Their labor is scarce and very expensive.
So if India tries to act like Germany and make things that require a huge amount of expensive machinery and very few people,
we would be incredibly inefficient. We would be producing capital-intensive goods at a very high cost because capital is our scarce resource. We'd be burning money trying to make something Germany can make in its sleep.
and vice versa.
Right. Conversely, if Germany tries to produce goods that require thousands of workers doing manual stitching or basic assembly, they would lose money rapidly because their labor costs are astronomical compared to ours.
And this directly leads to the theory of comparative advantage, right?
Yeah.
I feel like this is the absolute bedrock of global trade.
It is. The theory, which was originally popularized by David Ricardo, states that a country should export what it has a comparative advantage in. So India should export labor-intensive goods, things like textiles, leather products, gems, and jewelry, because we can make them cheaper and better than Germany.
And Germany should stick to what they do best.
Exactly. Germany should export capital-intensive goods, high-end cars, precision engineering, heavy industrial machinery, because they have the undeniable edge there.
So what happens when we actually trade those goods with each other?
Both sides win. It leads to what economists call welfare gains. This is really the magic of trade. By trading, we efficiently allocate scarce global resources. India gets high-quality machinery from Germany much cheaper than we could ever build it ourselves from scratch. Germany gets textiles from India vastly cheaper than they could make them domestically.
So it increases the real income for both partners. It's not a zero-sum game.
Not at all. Both countries are mathematically better off.
Which means isolation isn't just lonely, it's actively expensive for a country.
It is incredibly expensive. Sanjeev Verma explicitly calls it the cost of isolation. If you ignore trade, you end up with high costs, deep inefficiency, rampant inflation, and lopsided development. You might build a lot of factories to say you are self-reliant, but if they are producing substandard goods at double the global price, are you really building wealth?
That's a great point. It instantly reminds me of the pre-1991 era in India. We had domestic cars, but they were the exact same model for 30 years, and they cost a fortune relative to the average income.
The Ambassador car is the classic example of this. It was built like a tank, sure, but it wasn't fuel efficient, it wasn't technologically advanced, and it was expensive. So you see, the transition to looking outward moved from being just a policy choice to an absolute compulsion.
You have to do it.
Yes. As we grow, we simply must look outward to meet our exploding domestic requirements for technology and energy.
But I want to pause here for a second. It sounds simple in theory. Sell shirts, buy machines. But how do we actually keep score of all this? If I sell a shirt and buy a machine, there's a money trail, right?
Yes, and that is where we need to bring in Vivek Singh to really understand the mechanics of the global economy. We need to talk about the balance of payments, or the BOP.
Okay. The balance of payments. I hear this term thrown around the news all the time. BOP crisis, BOP surplus. It always sounds very intimidating to a beginner. What exactly is it?
Think of it simply as the country's main ledger. It systematically summarizes all economic transactions between the residents of a country and the rest of the world for a specific given period, usually a financial year.
So it's everything.
Everything. It covers goods, services, and assets. It's literally the accounting book of India versus the world.
And it essentially has two main pockets or accounts, right?
Correct. You have the current account and the capital account.
Let's break those down, because this is a core UPSC concept. What exactly goes into the current account?
The current account handles the here and now. It includes the trade in physical goods, which economists call visible trade.
Visible because you can physically see the cargo ships leaving the port, right? You can count the shipping containers.
Exactly. It's tangible. But the current account also includes services, which we call invisible trade. This would be software services, banking, insurance, or even tourism. When a foreign tourist visits the Taj Mahal and spends money, that is recorded as an invisible export for India.
Oh, that makes sense. Wait, where do remittances go? A lot of Indians work in the Gulf or the U.S. and send money back.
Great question. Remittances, the money sent back home by Indians working abroad, also sit right there in the current account. They are recorded under the subheading of transfers. They are a massive positive inflow for India.
Okay, so the current account is the day-to-day trading and income. What about the capital account?
The capital account handles investments and borrowings. It's fundamentally about assets and liabilities. So foreign direct investment, FDI, foreign institutional investment, FII, external commercial loans taken by Indian companies, and even NRI bank deposits fall under the capital account.
So this is money that comes in not to buy a finished product, but to build things or buy shares in companies.
Precisely. It's long-term capital movement.
Now, connecting this back to the text, Sanjeev Verma mentions a structural gap problem for India.
Yes, and this is the crux of our macroeconomic challenge. Structurally, for a very long time, India has had imports outstripping exports in the current account. We consistently buy more from the world, primarily crude oil, gold, and electronics, than we manage to sell to it in terms of merchandise.
And that creates a deficit.
Yes. This creates what we call a current account deficit, or CAD.
So we are essentially spending more foreign currency day-to-day than we are earning through our trade and services. That sounds inherently bad.
It sounds bad, and if left unchecked, it is. But it's actually manageable if you have a strategy. A current account deficit implies we need to find other ways to earn or attract that foreign currency to pay our import bills. And this is exactly where the capital account steps in to save the day.
How so?
We aim to attract foreign investment FDI and FII to fill that gap. We essentially say to the global market, look, we didn't sell enough shirts and software this year to pay for all our oil, so please invest your capital in our growing companies, bring your dollars here, and we'll use those incoming dollars to balance the books and pay for the oil.
Okay, so we balance the national checkbook by inviting foreign investment. But what if we don't have enough investment coming in during a bad year? What if global investors get spooked by a crisis and pull their money out?
Then we have a serious problem. If the capital account can't cover the current account deficit, we have to dip into our national savings. And those savings are our foreign exchange reserves.
Which brings us to what is actually sitting inside those reserves. It's not just massive stacks of $100 bills hidden under the RBI governor's mattress, is it?
No, although that's a funny mental image. Vivek Singh breaks down the composition of our Forex reserves very nicely. It's a strategic mix. The biggest chunk by far is foreign currency assets. These are mostly highly secure assets like U.S. Treasury bonds.
Okay.
Then we have a significant holding of physical gold. Then there is something called the reserve tranche position, or RTP, with the IMF. And finally, a very interesting component called SDRs, or special drawing rights.
SDRs. I've heard this referred to in financial papers as paper gold. Can we explain that? Because it sounds a bit like financial alchemy.
Paper gold is actually a great nickname for it. An SDR isn't a physical currency you can hold or spend at a local shop. You can't buy a coffee in Paris with an SDR. It's an international reserve asset created artificially by the International Monetary Fund.
So what is it exactly?
It's essentially a potential claim on the freely usable currencies of IMF member states.
But what is its value based on? Is it backed by anything?
Yes, it's backed by a carefully weighted basket of key global currencies. Currently, that basket includes the US dollar, the euro, the Chinese yuan, the Japanese yen, and the British pound.
So holding an SDR is kind of like holding a highly diversified mutual fund of the world's strongest fiat currencies.
That is a perfect analogy. It provides vital international liquidity. If a country is in deep economic trouble and its reserves are crashing, it can exchange its accumulated SDRs with other nations for actual usable hard currency to pay its pressing import bills. It's the ultimate sovereign safety net.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly to something that affects literally everyone listening, even if they aren't economic students. Exchange rates. Because this determines the price of the new iPhone, the cost of an Indian student studying abroad, and the daily price of petrol.
It absolutely does, and there are two fundamentally different ways economists look at exchange rates. One is the market exchange rate, the number you see when you type 1 USD to INR into Google. But the other, deeper measure is purchasing power parity, or PPP.
Ah, PPP. We have a direct PYQ connection here. There was a specific prelims question in 2019 regarding how PPP works.
Yes, there was. PPP is essentially a way of comparing the real size and strength of different economies by looking at what their money can actually buy on the ground.
Hmm.
The most famous, albeit simplified example of this is the Economist's Big Mac Index.
The burger index. I love this one. Walk us through it.
Right. Suppose a standard Big Mac burger costs $5 in New York. Now, if the market exchange rate is, say, 80 rupees to the dollar, pure math says that exact same burger should cost 400 rupees in India.
5 times 8.
Exactly. But if you walk into a McDonald's in Delhi or Mumbai, does a standard burger cost 400 rupees?
No way. It's significantly cheaper. It's probably 150 or 200 rupees.
Right. And what does that discrepancy tell us? It means the actual purchasing power of the rupee within India is much higher than what the international market exchange rate suggests. You can buy significantly more stuff goods, haircuts, rent, food with your money locally than the raw exchange rate implies.
So how does that affect our global ranking?
Well, by the PTP metric, the Indian economy looks much, much larger than it does by nominal GDP because our money goes so much further domestically. We are the third largest economy in the world by PPP.
But the catch is, when we engage in international trade, we can't pay Saudi Arabia in PPP terms. They don't care how cheap our burgers are. They want market rates for their oil.
Exactly. PPP is great for comparing domestic living standards, but for actual international trade competitiveness, economists rely on two other metrics: NEER and REER.
Okay, nominal effective exchange rate and real effective exchange rate. Break these down for us.
NEER is relatively straightforward. It is just the weighted average of our currency's exchange rate against a broad basket of our major trading partners' currencies. It tells us generally, on average, if the rupee is going up or down against the euro, yen, dollar, and dirham combined.
So it's a broader picture than just rupee dollar.
Yes, but NEER has a flaw. It doesn't account for domestic prices. That's where REER comes in. REER is the truth teller. REER adjusts the NEER for inflation differentials between countries.
Why does factoring in inflation matter so much for trade?
Because inflation secretly changes the real cost of producing goods. Imagine the rupee stays perfectly stable against the dollar at 80 for a whole year. The nominal chart looks totally flat. But suppose inflation inside India is running hot at 10%, while in the US it's only 2%.
Okay.
Even though the exchange rate hasn't moved a single paisa, Indian goods are suddenly becoming much more expensive to produce because raw materials, electricity, and wages are rising due to that 10% domestic inflation.
Oh, I see. So to a foreign buyer, our goods are getting pricier in real terms, even if the currency chart looks stable?
Exactly. REER mathematically captures that hidden loss of competitiveness. It is the true comprehensive measure of a nation's trade competitiveness. If our REER goes up, meaning it appreciates, it's a warning sign that our exports are losing their competitive edge globally.
Now let's talk about the actual movement of the currency, appreciation versus depreciation. I feel like there's a very common public belief, maybe a patriotic belief, that a strong currency is always inherently good. Like, the rupee should be 1-to-1 with the dollar. That means we are a superpower.
That is a massive fundamental misconception. Whether a strong or weak currency is good depends entirely on who you are in the economy.
Explain that. Who wins and who loses?
Okay, let's look at depreciation first. If the rupee depreciates, meaning it becomes weaker, say going from 80 to 85 against the dollar, it actually makes our exports significantly cheaper for foreigners.
Because their dollars now buy more rupees.
Yes. An American buyer with $100 can suddenly buy more Indian shirts than they could last month. So a depreciating rupee massively boosts export competitiveness. For an exporter, it's like throwing a nationwide discount sale for foreign buyers without having to cut domestic prices.
So the exporters absolutely love a weak rupee.
They love it. Their order books fill up. And this is a massive, but a weak rupee makes imports proportionally more expensive.
And since India imports roughly 80% of its crude oil.
Exactly. Since we import critical items like oil, gas, and fertilizers, a weak rupee leads directly to what we call imported inflation. The cost of transport goes up because diesel is pricier, which means the cost of vegetables goes up. The whole economy feels the pain of those expensive dollars.
So on the flip side, if the rupee appreciates and gets stronger,
Then imports become much cheaper. It's great for urban consumers buying imported iPhones or for domestic companies importing heavy foreign machinery to expand. It really helps keep national inflation down. But it actively hurts our exporters. Their goods become suddenly expensive abroad, and they lose market share to countries like Vietnam or Bangladesh.
and Vivek Singh actually mentions a specific dangerous risk associated with a currency getting too strong, right? The Dutch disease.
Yes, Dutch disease.
It sounds like a medieval plague. What is it?
It does sound like one. It refers to an economic phenomenon first observed in the Netherlands in the 1950s and 60s. They discovered huge natural gas reserves in the North Sea. Naturally, they started exporting it, and massive amounts of foreign money flooded into the country.
That sounds like a dream scenario.
You would think so, but because of this massive influx of foreign currency, the Dutch currency got super strong. It appreciated wildly.
And let me guess, that crushed their other exporters.
Exactly. The currency got so strong that their other traditional industries, their manufacturing and agriculture, simply couldn't compete globally anymore. Their non-gas exports became laughably expensive for the rest of the world. So the massive resource boom in one sector actually killed the rest of their diverse economy. That is the Dutch disease.
Wow. So managing an economy's trade profile is a really delicate balancing act. It's not just sell as much as you can at any cost. It's about maintaining this complex equilibrium.
Precisely. And honestly, this sheer complexity, along with the risks we just discussed, often leads to deep hesitation among policymakers. Which brings us right to Sanjeev Verma's section on the flip side to trade.
Right. Why do developing nations hesitate to open up their borders to free trade? I mean, if the pure economic math says trade is good and comparative advantage creates wealth, why is there so much political resistance?
Well, for a country like India, you have to factor in deep historical trauma. You cannot look at our trade policy without looking at history.
You're talking about the East India Company.
Yes. We have a deeply ingrained collective national memory of a foreign trading company coming to our shores under the innocent guise of commerce, and over time, leveraging that trade to take complete political and military control of the subcontinent.
That leaves a mark.
It creates a profound generational fear that unchecked trade inevitably leads to economic exploitation or a total loss of political sovereignty. That psychological barrier took decades to even begin to dismantle.
That makes total sense. It's like we played this free trade game before, and we literally lost our country for 200 years.
Exactly. So the hesitation is psychological and historical as much as it is economic, but there is also a very real conflict with national priorities.
Also,
Well, pure free trade is based entirely on efficiency and comparative advantage. But what if the most efficient use of Indian land is to grow cash crops like indigo, cotton, or tobacco for export to Europe instead of growing wheat and rice for our own people?
oh, I see. It becomes a battle of food security versus raw profit.
Right. A responsible government might deliberately choose to be economically inefficient by heavily protecting its farmers and subsidizing food crops just to ensure its billion-plus population doesn't starve during a sudden global crisis or a war. That is a completely valid political and humanitarian choice, even if it contradicts pure textbook economic theory.
And this fear, this need to protect national priorities, leads directly to protectionism.
Yes, governments build walls. They use tariff barriers, which are essentially straightforward customs duties or taxes slapped on imports to make foreign goods artificially expensive and protect domestic industries. But they also use something more subtle. Non-tariff barriers, or NTBs.
Ah, the NTBs. These are the sneaky ones, right?
In a way, yes, they don't look like taxes. These are things like import quotas, or incredibly strict sanitary and phytosanitary standards, or even complex political restrictions.
Give me an example of a sanitary standard being used as a barrier.
Sure. The European Union might suddenly ban the import of famous Indian Alfonso mangoes. They won't say it's to protect Spanish fruit growers. They will claim the Indian mangoes don't meet a highly specific new phytosanitary standard regarding fruit flies or pesticide residue.
Which effectively blocks the trade just as well as 100% tax would.
Exactly. It achieves the exact same protectionist goal without technically violating certain tariff agreements.
So given all these valid fears and these protectionist tools, does Sanjeev Verma conclude that we should just stay closed off?
No, quite the opposite, actually. His core stance is that the flip sides, the risks of exploitation and inequality, can only truly be resolved through greater, not lesser, openness. He argues vehemently that trade, when managed smartly, is a win-win, not a zero-sum game.
A zero-sum game meaning a situation where if I win $1, you must lose $1.
Right. Wealth is not a fixed pie. Trade grows the pie. Verma argues that isolation simply leads to a high-cost, low-growth trap. We already ran that experiment. We tried closing the doors and relying on import substitution from the 1950s all the way to 1990, and the result was the infamous Hindu rate of growth. We stagnated while East Asia skyrocketed.
So the solution isn't to hide from the global market.
No. The solution is to trade smarter, to negotiate better deals at the WTO, and to ruthlessly build our own domestic capacity so we aren't just passive victims of globalization, but active beneficiaries.
Which brings us perfectly to how the world actually managed to open up so dramatically. The facilitators of globalization. Sanjeev Verma talks about how the massive disconnected world rapidly shrank into what he calls a global village.
This is a fascinating section of the book because it steps away from pure policy and charts the actual technological shift that made globalization practically inevitable. It wasn't just politicians signing treaties, it was the laws of physics and engineering changing the game.
Right. First up on his list of facilitators is global accessibility,
which primarily means the revolution in air travel. Aviation moved from being an ultra-expensive elite luxury in the mid-20th century to something the common man could increasingly access. This obviously boosted global tourism, but more importantly for the economy, it allowed for rapid, face-to-face business connections across entirely different continents.
You could suddenly inspect a factory in Shenzhen, sign a contract in London, and be back at your desk in Mumbai within a few days.
Exactly. It accelerated the velocity of business, and running parallel to that was the telecommunication revolution.
This one is huge. I mean, we are living it.
We are. We went from incredibly expensive static audio landline calls where you had to book a trunk call just to speak to someone in another state to instantaneous visual communication.
Video conferencing, the mobile telephony revolution.
Yes. This fundamentally decoupled management from physical location. You can now oversee a massive manufacturing plant in Vietnam or a software team in Bangalore entirely from a laptop in New York.
And as communication improved, the actual flow of data changed. Verma calls this the information metamorphosis.
I like that term. We fundamentally shifted from an era of information asymmetry to an era of information symmetry.
Break that down for us. What does asymmetry look like in practice?
In the past, a local middleman in an Indian village could easily cheat a cotton farmer on price because the farmer had absolutely no idea what the going global price of cotton was in Manchester or Chicago. The middleman held all the data. The farmer was in the dark. That is extreme asymmetry.
And symmetry.
Now, thanks to cheap smartphones and widespread internet penetration, that same small-scale farmer or a local business owner has real-time access to the exact same global commodity price data as a high-powered broker sitting on Wall Street.
That completely levels the playing field.
It does. It effectively kills the arbitrage of ignorance. You can't exploit people as easily when they have Google. And finally, Verma points to media transformation.
Satellite TV.
Yes, satellite TV bringing global events, global brands, and global lifestyles directly into the middle-class drawing room. It created a shared global culture and a sudden awareness of what was possible.
And all of these forces combining led to what Verma describes as redefined living standards.
The massive societal shift from hard living to soft living.
What does he mean by soft living?
He means the widespread availability of convenience goods. White goods like washing machines, refrigerators, microwaves, and air conditioners. Globalized, ultra-efficient production chains drove the prices of these machines down so drastically that they became accessible to a newly emerging, massive global middle class, freeing up millions of hours of domestic labor.
So, through tech and trade, we are all now officially living in this interconnected global village. But globalization isn't a static thing, is it? It's not done. Verma points out that it's constantly evolving.
Yes, and this is critical for anyone studying the current economy. The source material identifies 3 megatrends that are fundamentally shaping the new, modern globalization report. The old rules are changing.
Okay, let's look at trend number 1, shifts in production and labor markets.
This is the classic double-edged sword of free trade. Capital is ruthless. Production always moves to wherever it is most efficient and cheapest.
Which is great for consumer prices at Walmart.
Yes, but it has a massive impact on domestic jobs. It has led to severe income inequality within developed countries. The well-paying manufacturing jobs left high-cost countries like the US and UK and moved to low-cost centers like China and Southeast Asia.
But wait, isn't that trend starting to reverse now?
That is the new wrinkle. With the rise of advanced automation and AI, production might actually move back to the West. Think about it. If a sophisticated robotic arm is going to assemble the car anyway, why manufacture it in China and pay shipping costs? You might as well just build a fully automated factory in Detroit or Germany right next to your consumers.
Oh, wow. So the cheap labor advantage that developing countries have relied on for decades might be rapidly disappearing.
Exactly. That is a terrifying risk for countries banking their entire future solely on offering cheap manual labor to the world.
Which flows right into trend number 2, rapid advances in technology.
Yes. This is creating a brutal digital divide. Countries that fail to build out their digital infrastructure and don't have access to new tech risk being completely left behind. And it's not just about having slightly slower internet speeds. It's about being structurally cut off from the modern digital economy.
This instantly reminds me of a specific PYQ from the 2013 MEIS paper. There was a detailed question specifically asking about 3D printing.
That is a perfect high-level linkage to make. The question asks how 3D printing works and what its industrial advantages are. Now, place that in the context of our globalization discussion. 3D printing is immensely disruptive to traditional trade.
How so? Because it replaces factories.
Yes. Imagine you need a highly specific plastic spare part for a medical machine. Traditionally, you order it, a factory in Taiwan molds it, puts it in a shipping container, puts it on a boat, it goes through customs, and a truck delivers it to your hospital a month later.
That's the global supply chain.
Right. But with an industrial 3D printer, the company in Taiwan just emails you the secure design file. You hit print in your own office in Mumbai, and you have the physical part in 3 hours.
That completely eliminates the ship, the container, the port, and the truck.
Exactly. It could drastically shrink global supply chains and significantly reduce the sheer volume of physical trade crossing oceans. It changes the entire logic of comparative advantage. Trade turns from moving physical atoms across borders to moving digital bits across servers.
That is genuinely fascinating. Technology could actually force production to localize again, reversing a century-old trend.
It's a very real possibility. And then we hit the third and perhaps most pressing mega trend, climate change. This is the existential one. We can no longer ignore the direct mathematical link between explosive global economic activity, energy-intensive lifestyle changes, and the degradation of the environment.
And we have another excellent PYQ connection here.
Yes, the recurring MEIS questions on sustainable development and the inherent constant conflict between development and the environment.
Right, the UPSC loves asking about that tension.
Because it's the defining administrative challenge of our time. To pull millions out of poverty, a developing country needs massive resources: steel, cement, coal. But that development inevitably harms the environment we all share. Globalization drastically increased the global carbon footprint simply through the logistics of transporting goods across the planet.
But it also facilitates the spread of green technology, right? Solar panels get cheaper because of global supply chains.
True. But we are now seeing climate change directly morphing into new trade barriers. A prime example is the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM, being rolled out by Europe.
What exactly is CBAM?
Basically, the EU is saying, we have strict environmental laws here, so making steel in Europe is expensive. If you, a developing nation, want to sell your cheaper steel into our market, and you made that steel using dirty, heavily polluting coal energy, you have to pay a massive carbon tax right at our border.
So they're taxing the carbon footprint of the import.
Yes. It essentially forces developing countries to clean up their energy grids if they want to retain access to lucrative Western markets. It blends environmental policy directly with harsh trade tariffs.
Wow, okay, so we have these massive shifting trends: automation, 3D printing, carbon taxes. How does a massive, complex country like India navigate all this?
Yeah.
We clearly need a rock-solid strategy. This brings us to segment 6, future strategies.
Right. Sanjeev Verma outlines two primary models of export growth that countries have historically pursued.
Let's start with Model 1, export-led growth. This is famously known as the Asian Tigers model.
Yes. South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore in the late 20th century. They achieved miraculous, rapid economic growth by focusing almost entirely on capturing external markets.
So they weren't building for themselves.
Not initially, no. They industrialized by making things specifically for Western consumers. They didn't really care if their own citizens could afford to buy the color TVs or the cars they were assembling. Their sole national objective was to sell those items to America and Europe to suck in foreign capital.
It worked incredibly well for them, but Verma notes there's a severe structural risk there.
Yes, he very poetically calls them butterfly economies.
Why a butterfly?
Because a butterfly is beautiful to look at, but it is incredibly fragile. Because these economies are so hyper-dependent on the health of foreign markets, if the global economy catches a slight cold, they catch deep pneumonia.
They have no internal shock absorbers.
Exactly. The 1997 Asian financial crisis is the prime historical example. If the U.S. consumer suddenly stops buying due to a recession, the entire Korean or Taiwanese factory system crashes overnight because there is no domestic demand to replace it. They are highly susceptible to global contagion.
So if we don't want to be a fragile butterfly, what is the alternative strategy?
The alternative is growth-led exports. This is closer to the blend we see in India and, to a large extent, modern China.
How does growth-led fundamentally differ from export-led?
The primary focus is inverted. The initial goal is to build a massive, robust domestic manufacturing base first, specifically to satisfy your own huge internal demand.
So making things for Indians to buy first.
Exactly. You build roads, factories, and power grids to serve your own population. And as your domestic economy matures, scales up, and becomes globally efficient, exports naturally begin to grow as a logical byproduct of that sheer scale.
That sounds much more stable.
It is significantly more sustainable for large, heterogeneous, populous economies like India. We are blessed with a massive, built-in domestic consumer market. We don't absolutely need to rely on the whims of European buyers to drive our baseline growth. We can grow simply by selling to each other, and then exports become the powerful secondary engine, the cherry on top.
And to actively facilitate this domestic manufacturing push, we launched the Make in India initiative. Now, Verma points out this is a branding strategy, but he breaks it down into 4 highly specific pillars that are great for mains answers.
Yes, it is vital to know these pillars. Make in India isn't just a cool logo of a lion made of industrial gears. The 4 pillars represent actual structural shifts. First is new processes. Improving the ease of doing business. Radical delicensing and deregulation, making it so you can actually start a factory without having to bribe 10 different inspectors and wait 3 years for a permit.
Crucial. Pillar 2, new infrastructure.
You cannot be a global manufacturing hub if you can't physically move the goods. This means building dedicated industrial corridors, smart cities, and high-speed freight rail networks connecting the hinterland to the deep water ports.
Pillar 3, new sectors.
Strategically opening up sectors to foreign direct investment that were previously walled off due to paranoia. We are talking about allowing FDI in defense production, in railway infrastructure, and in massive construction projects.
And finally, Pillar 4, which seems more psychological, new mindset.
But it might be the most important one. It's about fundamentally changing the bureaucratic DNA of the government. Moving from acting as a regulator whose main job is to find reasons to say no and stop things, to becoming a facilitator whose job is to hold the investor's hand and help them navigate the system.
And tied to this whole initiative is a very catchy slogan regarding quality standards. Zero defect, zero effect.
I really love that phrase. It perfectly encapsulates the modern manufacturing ethos. Zero defect means producing goods to absolute world-class quality standards. No rejected shipments, no shoddy workmanship. We want the Made in India tag to mean premium reliability.
And zero effect.
Zero effect means manufacturing with zero adverse environmental effect. It signals to the world that India wants to industrialize responsibly and competitively. We absolutely do not want to become the world's next toxic pollution dump just to make a quick buck.
Now, briefly, the government doesn't just rely on slogans. They have specific financial schemes to incentivize this export push. We constantly hear the acronyms SEIS and MEIS in the news.
Right. MEIS stands for the Merchandise Exports from India scheme, and SEIS is the Service Exports from India scheme. They are essentially complex subsidy mechanisms.
How do they work in practice?
Basically, the government grants active exporters special scrips or duty credit certificates based on the value they export. It's a direct financial incentive. The logic is that our domestic exporters face severe infrastructural inefficiencies. Terrible roads, high electricity costs, port delays that exporters in China or Germany do not face.
Oh, so it levels the playing field.
Exactly. These financial incentives help artificially offset those systemic disadvantages, allowing our companies to keep their final export prices competitive on the global market until our internal infrastructure fully catches up.
Okay, this has been an incredible journey. We've covered the core theory, the complex BOP mechanics, and the forward-looking strategies. Now, I want to take a few minutes to really drill down into the PYQ linkages. We mentioned a few in passing, but let's look closely at the global institutions.
This is absolutely non-negotiable for the aspirants listening. You cannot claim to understand globalization without intimately understanding the specific multilateral institutions that govern the rules of the game.
Let's start with a classic, the 2013 mains question. The World Bank and IMF exhibit many common characteristics, yet their role is distinctly different. I feel like this confuses people constantly. They seem like the same thing.
It is a very common confusion because they were born at the same time at Bretton Woods, but Vivek Singh's section on multilateral institutions clarifies their mandates perfectly. Think of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, as the global financial firefighter.
The firefighter, okay.
Its sole focus is strictly on macroeconomic and balance of payments stability. If a country literally runs out of foreign currency reserves and cannot pay for its essential imports like India famously did in 1991 or like Sri Lanka did very recently, the IMF steps in.
They bring the bailout money.
Right. They provide a short-term emergency loan of hard currency, but it comes attached to incredibly strict, painful economic policy conditions. They monitor the short-term vital signs of the world's financial health. It's the ER doctor.
And the World Bank. If the IMF is the firefighter, what are they?
The World Bank, and specifically its main lending arm, the IBRD, is the architect. Its focus is entirely on long-term structural development. It doesn't do short-term bailouts.
What do they fund?
It funds massive multi-year projects, building hydroelectric dams, laying national highway networks, funding nationwide primary education programs, and broad poverty alleviation schemes. It's about slow, methodical reconstruction and long-term capacity building, not immediate crisis management.
Okay, that is a crystal clear distinction. Firefighter versus architect. Now let's move to the World Trade Organization, the WTO. There is a complex 2016 mains question asking about the WTO's broader aims versus the highly contested Doha round issues.
Right. At its core, the WTO's broader aim is simple: to promote free, predictable, and fair trade between nations by reducing tariffs and creating binding rules. But the Doha round of negotiations, which started in 2001, got hopelessly stuck.
Why? What's the main conflict?
The core conflict is the fundamental North-South divide, the battle between wealthy, developed nations and poorer, developing nations. The two main intractable sticking points are agriculture subsidies and NAMA.
Okay, let's start with agriculture. What is the beef there?
Developing nations, led strongly by India, argue that the wealthy West, primarily the U.S. and the European Union, give massive hidden financial subsidies to their own rich corporate farmers. This makes Western agricultural products artificially absurdly cheap on the global market.
Which undercuts farmers in the developing world.
Brutally. A poor farmer in Punjab cannot compete on price with a heavily subsidized mega farm in Iowa. Furthermore, India absolutely insists on the right to heavily procure and subsidize its own food grains to ensure domestic food security through public stockholding. We refuse to compromise on feeding our poor just to satisfy a free trade formula.
And what does the West want in return?
They want what is called non-down agricultural market access. They essentially say, fine, if we are going to compromise on farm subsidies, India and China must drastically lower their tariffs on our manufactured industrial goods and services. It's a massive, multi-decade tug-of-war that stalled the entire WTO process.
Got it. Very clear. Let's hit another PYQ, the Global Competitiveness Report. This popped up as a prelims question in 2019. Who exactly publishes it and why do we care?
It is published annually by the World Economic Forum, the WEF. And it matters immensely because these international rankings directly influence global investor sentiment.
It's basically a sovereign report card.
Exactly. Multinational corporations look at these reports when deciding where to build their next billion-dollar factory. If your country ranks high on infrastructure and ease of doing business, you attract more foreign direct investment. If you rank low, the capital goes to your neighbors instead.
Speaking of FDI, let's quickly touch on the issue of FDI in defense. Why is that such a frequently debated topic in the exams and in Parliament?
Because domestic defense production has traditionally been an absolute holy cow in India, it was totally restricted to state-owned enterprises for obvious national security reasons. But the recent policy shift to strategically open up FDI in defense is about curing a very specific vulnerability, reducing our massive import dependence.
Right, because India is historically one of the largest arms importers on the planet.
Yes, we buy billions of dollars of hardware from Russia, France, and the U.S. By allowing higher FDI limits, the government wants those foreign defense giants to partner with private Indian companies, actually transfer their advanced technology, and physically manufacture those weapon systems here on Indian soil.
Which perfectly aligns with the Make in India goals.
Exactly. The ultimate strategic goal is to stop buying expensive fighter jets off the shelf and start building them ourselves, creating high-tech jobs and retaining that capital inside the country.
Okay, let's take a breath and unpack everything we've done here. We've gone from the very basic foundational idea of, I need to buy crude oil, so I absolutely must sell cotton shirts, all the way up to the intense geopolitical complexities of WTO agricultural negotiations and sovereign defense contracts.
It is a truly massive, interconnected landscape.
So if we zoom all the way out, what is the core takeaway for our listener? If they have to write a conclusion to a general globalization essay, what is the synthesis?
The primary takeaway is that globalization is not a simple light switch that a government can easily flip on or off at will. It is a massive, relentless historical tide. You cannot command the tide to stop, but you absolutely can and must learn how to build better boats and learn how to swim.
That's a great analogy.
We started by analyzing the sheer imperative to look outward. We realized that clinging to isolation isn't just patriotic stubbornness. It is actively, mathematically expensive and leads to stagnation. We learned the hard mechanics that we simply must export to earn the dollars required to buy our developmental necessities.
We also didn't ignore the dangers.
No. We carefully examined the real risks, the flip side of exploitation and domestic inequality. But we concluded that the only viable solution to those risks is smarter, more aggressive engagement and building domestic capacity, rather than a cowardly withdrawal back behind tariff walls.
And crucially, we are seeing that the very nature of this globalization is rapidly mutating thanks to technology and climate change.
Exactly. The rules of the 1990s no longer apply. We aren't just trading physical shipping containers full of plastic goods anymore. We are now trading massive streams of digital data, proprietary AI technology, and increasingly, we are trading and taxing carbon footprints.
I want to end this deep dive with a final thought, something directly from the tone of the sources we used. Sanjeev Verma famously mentions that globalization creates a global village. Now, on paper, that sounds very cozy and unified.
It does sound utopian.
But here's where it gets really interesting, and this is what I want you, the listener, to mull over. In a modern world that is currently facing those three megatrends, widening income inequality, a brutal digital divide fueled by AI, and the existential threat of climate change, are we actually building a unified village where everyone has a secure roof over their head? Or, through this new phase of globalization, are we simply just laying high-speed fiber optic cables to connect the wealthy mansions while leaving the rest of the village in the dark?
That is the truly provocative administrative question. If the digital divide permanently cuts developing nations off from the AI economy, and if extreme climate change physically hits the poorest populations the hardest, this new global village might turn out to be deeply, fundamentally segregated.
And the answer to that challenge, the way we avoid that dystopian outcome, lies entirely in how you, the future administrators and policymakers of this country, manage this complex transition. It's no longer about whether to stop trade, that debate is over. It's entirely about how to make trade work for the bottom billion.
Precisely. Policy execution is the only thing that matters now.
Wow. That gives us a tremendous amount to think about. We've thoroughly covered the historical imperative, the mathematical mechanics, the inherent risks, and the strategic future.
It's a very comprehensive, necessary roadmap for the syllabus.
All right, friends, that officially wraps up our deep dive into looking outward and decoding the global economy. If this deep dive finally helped clarify these complex economic concepts for you, please take a second and subscribe to Simplified UPSC by PPP on YouTube. It is literally the best way to make sure you don't miss the next session.
And if you find real value in this level of detailed analysis, please consider supporting us on Patreon so we can keep dedicating the hours required to keep these deep dives coming. Your financial support is what makes this entire project possible.
A massive, heartfelt thank you to our current supporters. You guys are the real MVPs behind the scenes.
And definitely don't forget to check the public Telegram channel for those free notes and the practice PYQs we discussed today.
And for the truly serious learner who wants the ultimate edge, our private Telegram library has the meticulously organized premium notes, the detailed concept breakdowns, and the exact model mains answers for everything we just talked about. Just DM us on the public channel to get your access.
Keep grinding, keep learning, and keep questioning the material.
See y'all in the next deep dive.